All right. Hello. Welcome back to another Classic Comics live stream, another Trek Talk. Been a few weeks. Had been pretty busy with other things, but trying to get back on a regular schedule here. So I won't be talking about a particular episode of the original series this week. I just had a drill with my National Guard unit this weekend, and so just didn't have time to put together the usual stream that I would do. But it occurred to me the 45th anniversary of the release of Star Trek: The Motion Picture was last Friday, and so I thought, well, that's something that would be worth talking about, and I could throw something together on that pretty quick. So I'll be talking about that. I'll also be talking about the Phase Two, Star Trek Phase Two series, of course, that was kind of the precursor to the motion picture, which never happened. And again, I'll be talking about kind of the making of it and how the events led from phase two up to the production of the motion picture. And first of all, we'll recognize some folks. Hello, Adega. Thank you for stopping by, sir. Always a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much. And J Man, hey man, thanks for stopping by. Love the movie. Yeah, 10 out of 10. Absolutely. And Jay Rocker, hello, sir. Great movie. Saw it in the theater. That's cool. Yeah, I actually I saw the a remastered version of the motion picture about a year and a half ago. I guess I think it was like September of 23. I think, or maybe it was 22. I'm pretty sure it was 23. And man, they had done a great job. It looked really good. They'd kind of cleaned up the effects, which, from back then looked kind of rough in some spots, honestly. And they also added a couple of shots, a couple of FX shots. Like there's a shot of V'ger, where kind of that big cloud kind of dissipates and you see the vessel itself clearly. And that looked really cool. Okay. I guess I'll just go ahead and jump. Oh, and also, if I have time, I'm not sure how long I'll go, but I may talk about that footage of Kirk that was released a couple of weeks ago. I really wanted to do a stream on that when it was released, but I couldn't get to it. So I may spend some time talking about that too. We'll see. But first of all, we'll just go ahead and talk about phase two. Now, I tried to set these PowerPoints up so that they would kind of, cycle through the slides automatically, with a timer. And when I just open up PowerPoint and go into the studio mode, it works, but it doesn't seem to work when I set them up in here. I don't know, so I'm gonna have to go through these slides manually, so it's probably going to be a little clunky. And of course, here we see what was going to be the phase two Enterprise, which obviously it's much closer to the original. It's basically the original show version, just with the different nacelles, although they do have kind of the lighted portions on the front, but they are the thinner variety, and the struts also. Oh, hey, Lord Thoth. Hello, sir. Thanks for stopping by. Good to see you. And but other than that, it's pretty much. Oh, and yeah, and they've got the little torpedo launcher here, but it's still got the old style deflector dish, and the saucer section is pretty much of the original one as well. Okay, so as we all know, Star Trek was canceled in 1969, and as early as around 1972, so about just 3 years after the show had been canceled, NBC was already kind of looking at doing another version of Star Trek, some kind of revival, and they had contacted Roddenberry and had hired him to produce something that would be. It was gonna now initially it was gonna be a TV movie that would be a pilot for a new Star Trek series. Um, and they had some talks for a while, and of course it was around somewhere in this window that the Star Trek animated show happened. Now, by 1975, Roddenberry signed a contract with Paramount to produce a TV movie that was going to be called The God Thing. And he spent some month trying to develop it, and he had several writers pitch ideas for this story to him, but it really didn't go anywhere. And later that year, in August, his contract was terminated. Now, Paramount subsequently put a guy named Jerry Eisenberg in charge of the project as executive producer. And this was in July 1976. Now, a couple of guys named Chris Bryant and Alan Scott were hired to write a script, which they titled Star Trek Planet of the Titans. And let me skip ahead through this. Now, that kind of triangular looking, and this is yeah, these are, so some of these production designs here, I think some of these sketches are from the God Thing originally. Like this is the planet, or not the God Thing, Planet of the Titans, excuse me. This one and here. Okay, and then of course this Enterprise, this kind of wedge-shaped Enterprise, which is was done by Ralph McQuarrie. This was for Planet of the Titans, and of course, thankfully, they never really used this version. I don't know. I'm just not crazy about it. I mean, I like Ralph McQuarrie's work and all, but Star Trek and Star Wars aren't the same thing, and it's too reminiscent of a Star Destroyer for one thing. Okay, now Bryant and Scott turned in their script in March of 77, and I'm going to be noting the time frame here because this is all happening, and of course a lot of what happens will eventually be influenced by the release of Star Wars. Um, Now, this original script was rejected, and they subsequently left the project because they were getting different feedback and different demands for the script from Roddenberry and then also from the director, from Kaufman. And also the people above them, the studio execs, they felt really didn't know what they wanted from this thing. So they felt like there's no way we can really produce something that's going to make everybody happy. And so subsequently they just walked away. Now, on May 9th of 77, again, this is about 2 weeks before Star Wars would be released, Paramount announced that they were going to. Now, at this point, it had become a feature film, but they canceled that. And subsequently, on, let's see. Okay, so they subsequently announced the Paramount television service, a fourth network. They announced that on June 10th of 77, so about 2 weeks after Star Wars had been released. Okay, and then 7 days later, Roddenberry announced that Star Trek would be returning to television on this new service, saying that hopefully it'll be even better than the original, and that they would have most of the original cast back, but there may be a few new people on the show as well. Roddenberry said that the show would continue to cover current themes in science fiction, in order as the first series had, saying that they would be touching on subjects like hijacking, nationalism, and radicalization. And he also wanted to spend more time showing 23rd century Earth. A guy named Robert Goodwin was placed in charge of developing the feature films that would follow each week's episode. Now, for the screenwriting aspect of the production, Harold Livingston was recruited. And Roddenberry was given complete creative control over this new project by Paramount, which had promised him that he would be able to make the project a first-class effort with a budget to suit it. So Roddenberry then set about trying to bring back a lot of the folks who had worked on the original show. Now, one of those who was Matt Jeffries, who of course had been one of the production designers on the original show. He had designed the original Enterprise, of course. But at this point, Jeffries was actually the production designer on the Little House on the Prairie. And that show was pretty popular and doing well. And so I think because of that, Matt Jeffries was reluctant to leave and come back to Star Trek. Probably because he figured the show's doing well, it'll be on for at least another few years. Star Trek, I could leave and do this new movie, then maybe it succeeds, maybe it doesn't, who knows. So he wound up recommending a guy named Joseph Jennings as the art director. Now, by September, it had become apparent that they needed to hire a story editor. Now, Roddenberry's personal assistant at this time, a guy named John Poville, had already been essentially doing those duties. And so Livingston suggested that Poville should just take over that role officially, but Roddenberry disagreed, which is interesting. But Livingston threatened to quit unless Poville was given the job. So Roddenberry eventually relented and let Poville take over. But Livingston has said that apparently that really is where the relationship between he and Roddenberry kind of started to turn sour. Now, the 2 hour pilot was going to be based on a story outline that Roddenberry had written for the TV show Genesis 2, which had, I think there had been a TV movie pilot for Genesis 2 in 1973. And he had written a follow up to that, and which was called Robot's Return, which is about a gigantic alien craft that comes to Earth searching for its creator. And so he basically took that story and kind of refurbished it for Star Trek. Alan Dean Foster was hired to adapt the story for Trek, and in the process introduce the new Enterprise and the new members of the crew as they confront this giant, seemingly omnipotent alien threat. Uh, Now, with a production deadline that was coming soon and unable to find a suitable TV writer to take the job of making the teleplay, Livingston took on the job of writing the teleplay himself. Now, by August of 1977, discussions had been held with the main cast from the original series, as well as some of the actors who had played recurring characters on that show. And I don't know who specifically that was. I'm guessing probably Mark Leonard as Sarek was probably one of them. And no one had actually been signed, but Roddenberry expressed confidence they would all do so in an interview, except Leonard Nimoy, who he stated had declined to take the job and because he didn't want to do any more TV. Now, Nimoy himself, however, has kind of disputed Roddenberry's version of that. And what he says is that when he was contacted by Roddenberry for the show, he was basically told that he would do like the 2 hour premiere. But then after that, he would not be a series regular. He would maybe do 2 out of every 11 or so episodes. So one out of every, I mean, basically an episode like once every 5 episodes or so. And because of that, that's really the main reason why he turned it down. And apparently there was some bad blood, between Roddenberry and Nimoy at this time, because Nimoy had filed a civil suit against Paramount because since the original series had ended, of course, Paramount had been merchandising Star Trek heavily. And a lot of the time they were using Nimoy's likeness as Spock, on the products in order to sell them. And of course, Nimoy was not getting any of that money. None of the actors were. None of them were getting anything for any of that merchandising. And he had filed a suit in order to try and get some sort of compensation from them. And he had asked Roddenberry to testify in this suit, in support of him. And Roddenberry had refused to do so. And so they weren't getting along at the time. And why Roddenberry refused exactly, I don't know. But I mean, there was a lot of that. Like, I'm sure most of you know how for the original Halloween movie, the Michael Myers mask. It's a Captain Kirk mask, basically, or a Shatner mask, if you like. Um, and that mask, as I understand it, it was made from an actual mold of Shatner's face, not from Star Trek, but from I think some movie he had done somewhere in like the earlier mid 70s. He had to have a face mold made, and I guess the people who did it had subsequently taken that mold and had made masks and were selling them. And of course, he wasn't getting, without his permission, and he wasn't getting any money for it. And speaking of Shatner, so also he was also wanting quite a bit of money, I guess, because he also felt probably he was not getting the compensation from Paramount that he deserved. And because he was wanting so much money, because this original contract they were doing, it was going to be for a 2-hour pilot and 13 episodes, right? And so Paramount was thinking, he's wanting so much money, we may not want to keep him around long term. And that's why they created the character of Decker as an executive officer, with the thought that it may get to a point where Shatner's just going to be too expensive and we don't want him anymore. And then we can get rid of him and let Decker be the captain. Now, let's see. Now, so the returning cast members, they signed contracts. Yeah, so they would be paid for the pilot and 13 episodes, but this was regardless of whether the series got made or not. So they actually, once they signed the contracts, they would get paid whether the show went on or not. They were also given substantial pay increases over what they had received on the original series. And Roddenberry, let's see. Yeah, and so also with Nimoy, the issues with Nimoy necessitated the creation of Zahn as a potential replacement for Spock. Now, and also Ilea. Now, David Gautreaux, and let me, where is he? There he is. And of course, there's Ilea, and you can see her in the kind of old style Star Trek, Starfleet uniform. So for the TV series, it looks like visually it was going to look a lot more like the old series. The uniforms are going to be more of the old 60s style. And what little I've seen of the sets, I have some images of some of the sets in here, and they also look more like the old show than the movie did. But David Gautreaux, he was the guy who ended up getting the job of Spock. He was cast on September 26th after approaching the casting director personally. He didn't have an agent. He had heard about the part because he was dating the girl he was dating at the time. She worked for an agent, probably as a secretary or something, and that's how he heard about it. um, the final edition for the role had 8 actors, including Gautreaux, of various ages. Gautreaux later said that the one thing they all had in common was that they all had a slightly alien appearance. Hey, Joe Dog. Thank you for stopping by, sir. Good to see you. Um, as far as Gautreaux, I mean, obviously, having never really seen much of him in the part, it's hard to say how good he would have been. Personally, for me, he doesn't really work well as a Vulcan in my appearance. I don't know if it was conscious or not, but I think he's just, I don't know. I felt like he was just a little too much of a pretty boy for the role. I don't know. Maybe it's stereotyping, but I think of Vulcans as being more kind of aloof and kind of have a gaunt appearance, probably because Nimoy has just defined Vulcans so much. But I just don't see him having the gravitas. And it's interesting because if you look at the character description, so Zahn was going to be fully Vulcan, right? Not half Vulcan like Spock. And so have much less of an understanding of humans. And a big part of his character was going to be him trying to understand humans and human emotions and getting to understand them. And when you think about it, that kind of sounds like Data in a way. And I wonder if in a way Zahn wasn't almost like a kind of proto Data in a sense. Okay, so he was hired for the pilot and for the 13 subsequent episodes, and he also was he had a 6-year option on his contract. Now he was actually asked to come back and audition again. He had kind of been given the role, but then I guess they got cold feet and were like, maybe there's another guy. And so they asked him to come back and audition again. And they actually had to pay him to come back because he had actually landed a guest appearance on Fantasy Island. And he was going to have to skip that episode, skip that job in order to show up for the audition. So they had to pay him. And after that, though, again, he kind of did better and wound up getting the role. Okay, and Joe Dog says, "Do you like the motion picture or Wrath of Khan better?" Well, I think Wrath of Khan. I mean, Wrath of Khan's the better movie, definitely, and I think most people would probably say that. I mean, there may be some who would opt for the motion picture. The motion picture is the most, I think, in a sense, what Star Trek was kind of aiming to be or aspired to be, in a sense that it was like taking science fiction seriously and trying to kind of comment on the human condition in interesting ways and stuff like that. But Wrath of Khan is definitely the more entertaining film. Okay. Okay, so the plans, let's see. Now, both PTS and the Star Trek revival were announced in early June. And the plan was that PTS was going to start as just one night of programming on Saturdays, with Star Trek as kind of the centerpiece. And obviously, this is kind of is a precursor to the eventual UPN network that would debut about 20 years later in the 90s with Star Trek Voyager as its centerpiece. Now, with the exception of Nimoy, the entire cast and crew returned. Pre-production on the series began with the emphasis on what would be the standing sets of the Enterprise, which differed radically in layout design and detailing from those of the original series. And okay, so here, this is kind of a rough look at what this is like an incomplete version of the engine room. And so this was going to introduce the idea of the kind of vertical warp core, because in the original the warp core was horizontal, right? And they would, in the motion picture, and subsequently I think in other movies it would be vertical, but then in Next Generation they would go to I'm sorry, horizontal, excuse me. They had a horizontal one in the motion picture in the other movies. Now in Next Gen they would go to a vertical one, but they already were kind of toying with that here. And I've got some images in here of some sketches. Excuse me a moment. Sorry, I needed a drink of water. Of what this production designers kind of had in mind for the original. Now this is interesting. If I can, so this is an early sketch of what the bridge would have looked like. And what the bridge would have looked like is it basically would have been just kind of Kirk like in a captain's chair, but they would all kind of be sitting at a table basically. And I think this thing would have like some kind of holographic projector or something, but just a radically different take. Now, obviously, they wound up not doing that, and this is a bit closer to what it eventually would be. And this is pretty close too. The captain's chair is definitely different. And here we see some early photos of the set itself, which was being built. We see some of the controls here and there. And this, I think, is some kind of a photo of some kind of lighting test, maybe, or something, because these people are obviously not the actors themselves. These are stand-ins or something. And there's another shot and a close-up. And an interesting thing about the set is that in the motion picture set, some of the controls actually had functionality. You could press them and actually make things light up. They would actually cause monitors to come on, or instruments to blink and stuff like that, which is departure. And there's a look at the what the completed warp core would look like. And that's, I guess, maybe a wreck deck or something like that. That table looks so 70s. That is so 1970s looking. And then some. Oh, and that's what the transporter would have looked like. And some sketches of the ship. Okay. All right. So there are also costumes and props being designed. Now, ultimately, Paramount's plans for its network would kind of fall apart because I guess the network probably did some kind of projections, financial projections or something, but they came to the conclusion that they wouldn't be able to produce enough revenue to make the network viable. So they canceled the idea of the network. That was discontinued. However, they just said that internally. Where is it here? Um, yeah, here we go. The low anticipated advertising revenues for the Paramount television service indicated that it was not viable, and Paramount Pictures' parent company, Gulf and Western, its chairman, Charles Bloodhorn, refused to support the plan, resulting in the eventual exit of Paramount Chief Executive Officer Barry Diller. In August of 77, Paramount President Michael Eisner announced in an internal memo that the 2-hour pilot script was to be the long sought after feature film instead of a TV movie. However, the cancellation of the series and the network were not immediately disclosed in an effort to prevent negative publicity. Accordingly, development of the series and its scripts continued for a further 5 months, during which time tests were filmed on the incomplete Enterprise sets. And apparently, at this time, even the cast didn't know that this was going to be a movie. It would be months later before they would find out. Oh yeah, this is actually going to be a feature film. Now, on October 28th, Persis Kambata was hired to portray Ilea, and let me go back to her. See, what was she? There she is. And I think in this image, she's actually got a bald cap on. I don't think her head is actually shaved here. The casting for the first officer, Willard Decker, was also delayed, both because of a slight delay in the production, but also because the writers were no longer sure that the character would be needed. This was because, despite auditions being conducted at the same time that Gautreaux was cast as Zahn, during which in his second audition with Barrett, he also read lines against 10 actors competing for the role of Decker. One further change to the cast was to have been the return of Grace Lee Whitney as Janice Rand. In 1977, having read the back cover of Susan Sackett's Letter to Star Trek book and discovering that one of the frequently asked questions sent into the production team was, whatever happened to Grace Lee Whitney, Whitney herself got in touch with Sackett and was invited along to meet with Roddenberry at his office in Paramount Studios. And that's how she wound up getting involved in the production. Okay, and then something else that was a big part of this, or a big influence on this, was a story called In Thy Image. And I think that's what of originally the Robot's Return story was. Um, Let me see. Okay, yeah. So in August of 1977, Alan Dean Foster submitted a story for the 2 hour premiere of this TV series. Now it opens with the Enterprise receiving a Starfleet communication detailing the appearance of an enormous metallic shape moving to Earth. Kirk is given the task of intercepting whatever it might be. All they know is that the thing is 30 kilometers across, 70 kilometers in length, and emits a radiation that causes sensors to go haywire. Now, as the Enterprise approaches, the Vulcan science officer, Zahn in this case, 'cause Spock isn't there, comes to the conclusion it must be some kind of vessel. They pull up near it, and uh, the intruder attempts communication, and whoever puts it on a speaker. The vessel declares that it is the servant of a god known as Insa. Zahn checks with the computer and finds no reference to a deity named Insa. The metallic voice explains that it is on its way to Earth, the home world of its god. It announces Insa showed the chosen people, we of the Wan, the existence and magnificence of the universe. In return, we of the Wan wish to return this gift by clearing Insa's world of the festering disease Insa indicated was poisoning its surface. Now, the first officer, Decker, is confused by this and questions the other vessel. Then the metallic voice refers to him and the other crewmen as infestations. Kirk orders photon torpedoes fired, but they have no effect. He orders the Enterprise to warp speed, but again, nothing happens. They find they're trapped in a tractor beam. Decker is trying to figure out why the WAN has not destroyed them, even though it clearly has the power to do so. And Kirk deduces that it wants to kill the crew, but not harm the ship, perhaps to learn more about the Federation and its capabilities. To prevent this from happening, Kirk orders Scotty to overload the engine so the vessel will self destruct. He gives the order, but the computer refuses to carry it out, replying, I have been ordered not to allow self destruction because it would not be to the greater glory of the great god Insa. Then these probes made of light appear, kind of like in the motion picture, but eventually the probes leave. Now, elsewhere on the ship, there are reports of a tiger, a pack of wolves, and an army of ants, as well as alligators, eagles, elephants, and lions. A swarm of bees materializes on the bridge, and they are killed with phaser fire. Zahn discovers that one of the dead bees is actually mechanical, and so are all the other creatures that are appearing. They attempt to communicate with the alien ship and are shocked to realize the ship is actually, of course, just a big machine, a big computer, basically. Zahn comes to the conclusion that the Enterprise was not destroyed because the WAN considers the Enterprise a smaller version of itself, and the crew a disease that is infecting it. Kirk does his best to convince the WAN that they are intelligent creatures, but it won't listen. The alien ship continues on the way to Earth. The WAN explains that they knew nothing of the universe beyond until one day the great god Insa came to their world. Insa told them of the universe beyond, and this great vessel was built to return the body of Insa to its home and to exterminate the organic life that enslaved Insa's companions. Kirk, Zahn, Decker, and McCoy are transported aboard the alien spacecraft and appear in a huge chamber. And then robot reproductions of their own crew wheel a mobile cart into the room with a dome cover on it. They discover that the god Insa is actually a space probe launched by NASA in 1973. Obviously, this mirrors the motion picture. Um, let's see. The one accepted the probe as a god and they misinterpreted the information that was in it. Now, through pleading for man as a species and a plan in which the Enterprise crew. So it turns out that the Zahn that beamed over, is not really Zahn, it's a robot. that they created, and they put a bomb in it. And so they tell Zahn, or they tell the Wand, you've got to cease threatening Earth, or we'll detonate the bomb and destroy you. And the Wand basically says, "Yeah, okay, you got me. I guess. Yeah, you win." And yeah, Jay Rocker says, "Yeah, it's also very evocative of the Changeling from the original series." Yeah, I am Nomad. Hold on, lost my place here. Okay. Now, let's see. So, a key premise of In Thy Image story was to see Earth, yeah, threatened by, was to see Earth threaten itself for the first time. And that's a good point, is that in Star Trek, the motion picture, that's the first time in Star Trek, canon Star Trek, I guess we'd say, where Earth itself is directly threatened. That never really happened on the original show. Producer Goodwin proposed that this story should be a 2-hour pilot of the series. He would later recall at this meeting, this changed the direction of the franchise, as Eisner declared that this story is the one he had been looking for to make a feature film. Okay, now by November, Livingston and Roddenberry were no longer working well together. They had each redrafted In Thy Image themselves, and they'd basically each done their own rewrite of it and presented these versions to Eisner. The Paramount executive's response was that Roddenberry's version was more suited for television, and Livingston's was better for a movie and better overall. He then handed this over to Collins, a writer who was assigned to combine certain elements of Roddenberry's version into Livingston's and complete that draft by the end of that month. The first public announcement of the cancellation of the service and of phase two actually was by gossip columnist Rona Barrett at the start of December. In response, Paramount released a statement that said the new network had been pushed back to the fall of 1978, and that phase two had its episode order increased from 13 to somewhere between 15 and 22. These were all lies, of course, because they already knew it was going to be a movie at that point. Excuse me. Now, one of the changes around the same time as Barrett's reports was the realization that all the model work that had been done so far had to be redone from scratch, as it was not detailed enough to be up on a big movie screen. Now, two further changes that took place in December. Collins was dropped as the director, for Paramount wanted a motion picture director, not one with experience only in television. And Livingston allowed his contract to run out, and he left the production owing to the poor relationship he had with Roddenberry. By January, Paramount no longer pretended that Star Trek was going to be anything other than a feature film. Livingston was brought back, but only in a writing capacity, and Robert Wise was hired as director on the film to replace Collins. Okay, let's see. Now, after the groundbreaking opticals of Star Wars, Star Trek's producers realized that the film would require similarly high quality visuals. Um, Wise felt the story was sound, but that the action and visuals could be made more exciting. As the planned start of photography was in late spring of 1978, it was clear that production would not be ready. Time was of the essence now, that because at this point, because of the massive success of Star Wars, every major studio was working on some kind of a big budget sci-fi thing. You had Battlestar Galactica was in the works. Disney was working on The Black Hole, which would actually open just a couple of weeks after Star Trek the Motion Picture did. So we're actually going to have the 45th anniversary of The Black Hole here in a couple of weeks. Now, Douglas Trumbull, who a film director with an excellent reputation in Hollywood, he had done the special effects on 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he was the first choice for the director of the special effects, but he declined the offer. Trumbull was already busy working on Close Encounters of the Third Kind and was tired of being ignored as a director and having to churn out special effects on other people's productions. After completing the effects work, Trumbull planned on launching his own film using a new film process. The next choice was John Dykstra, who was similarly wrapped up in other projects. Post production supervisor Paul Rabwin suggested a guy named Robert Abel, whose production company Robert Abel and Associates might be up to the task. The scope and size of the effects grew after the television movie became a feature film. Abel and Associates bid $4 million to do the film's effects, and Paramount accepted, which would not work out so well. So rumors surfaced about difficulties regarding the special effects. About a year into the production, millions of dollars had been spent, but almost no usable footage had been created. Abel and Associates was not experienced in motion picture productions, and the steep learning curve was beginning to worry the producers. Despite being relieved of nearly half the effects work, it became clear by early 1979 that Abel and Associates would not be able to complete the remainder of the effects on time. Um, because by that, eventually they had gone back to Douglas Trumbull and given him offered to have him come back. The studio had spent nearly $5 million a year's worth of time on Abel and Associates, and Abel reportedly gained a new production studio filled with new equipment using Paramount's money, and had allegedly actually sold some of the other equipment that Paramount gave them. Trumbull had completed Close Encounters, but his plan for a full feature had been canceled by Paramount, possibly as punishment for passing on Star Trek. With Trumbull now available and primary responsibility for the motion picture's optical effects passed on to him, offering what Trumbull described as an almost unlimited budget. In March, the studio asked Trumbull if he could get the opticals work completed by December, the release date to which Paramount was financially committed. Trumbull was confident that he could get the work done without a loss of quality, despite a reputation for missing deadlines because of his perfectionism. Paramount assigned a studio executive to Trumbull to make sure he would meet the release date, and together with this other guy named Urisic, the effects team rushed to finish. The effects budget would eventually climb to $10 million. Time, not money, was the main issue. Trumbull had to deliver in 9 months as many effects as in Star Wars or Close Encounters of the Third Kind combined, which both had taken years to complete. The Glencoe-based facilities the team had used for Close Encounters were deemed insufficient, and a nearby facility was rented and outfitted with 5 more stages equipped with camera tracks and systems. Dykstra and his 60-person production house, Apogee Company, were subcontracted to Trumbull. 2 crews worked in 3 shifts a day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for about 9 months straight. Trumbull said that Wise in the studio gave him a tremendous amount of creative freedom despite being hired after the completion of nearly all the principal photography. The Spock spacewalk sequence, for example, was radically changed from the Able version. The original plan was for Kirk to follow Spock in a spacesuit and come under attack from a mass of sensor type organisms. Spock would save his friend, and then the two would proceed through V'ger. And I have some photos of that if I can find them. Actually, that may be in my other. Let me bring up my other. Oh, not that one. There we go. Let's see. If I can find him here, I've got some production stills somewhere. Let me see if I can bring him up here. Yeah, not in that one. Let me. Okay, here we go. So that's what, 70, 71. Okay. Yeah, so let me bring these up. Here we go. Okay, so, well, if the thing would cooperate. There we go. So these are some shots from this sequence, spacewalk sequence that wound up not being used. And what would happen is Kirk would follow Spock into V'ger, into the interior of it. And then Kirk was going to get attacked by these kind of crystal things that would kind of start sticking to him, and Spock would have to come back and help him. And then they would venture further into V'ger, and they would come to this thing, which in the script they refer to as a memory wall. And it's interesting because, that company Otoy that is doing those Star Trek kind of, CGI Star Trek films, short films, they have one called Memory Wall, and I assume there's some kind of connection, although I'm not entirely sure what it is. And I think these are some images of what the spacewalk originally was going to be. And there's some similarities. Okay. Now, Wise, Klein, and Abel had been able to agree on how to photograph the original spacewalk sequence, and the result was a poorly designed and ungainly effect that Trumbull was convinced was disruptive to the plot and would have cost millions to fix. Instead, he recommended a more stripped down sequence that omitted Kirk entirely and would be simple and easy to shoot, which is what we wound up getting. Post production was so late that Paramount obtained an entire MGM soundstage to store 3,000 large metal containers for each theater around the country. Each final film reel was taken while still wet from the film studio, put into a container with other reels, and then taken to airplanes waiting on tarmacs to be flown out to theaters. By the time the motion picture was finished, 26 million was spent on the film itself, while another 18 million had been spent on sets for the undeveloped Phase 2 series, much of which were not used for the film itself, which brought the total cost of the movie to 44 million. And that's not including all the advertising. Jerry Goldsmith scored the motion picture over a period of 3 to 4 months. A relatively relaxed schedule compared to a typical production, but time pressures resulted in Goldsmith bringing on colleagues to assist in the work. Alexander Courage came back, providing arrangements to accompany Kirk's log entries, while Fred Steiner wrote 11 cues of additional music, notably the music to accompany the Enterprise achieving warp speed and the first meeting with V'ger. The final recording session finished at 2 a.m. on December 1st, just 5 days before the film was in theaters. Owing to the rush to complete the film before the scheduled release date, Star Trek the Motion Picture was never screened before test audiences, which Wise later stated he regretted. On December 6, 1979, the director arrived in Washington, D.C. with a fresh print of the film at the world premiere held at the KB MacArthur Theater. Roddenberry, Wise, and the principal cast attended the gala function. While thousands of fans were expected to attend, there was heavy rain that evening, and as a result, the fan turnout was reduced to around 300. The premiere was followed by a black tie reception at the National Air and Space Museum. More than 500 people, consisting of the cast and crew, working members of the space community, and hardcore Trekkies who could afford to pay the $100 for admission, filled the museum. Star Trek the Motion Picture opened in the United States and Canada on December 7th, 1979, in 857 theaters and set a box office record for the highest opening weekend gross at the time, making $11,926,421 in its first weekend. It wound up grossing $82,258,456 in the US, making it the fifth highest grossing film of 1979. In the United States, the film sold the most tickets of any film in the franchise until Star Trek in 2009, and it remains the highest grossing film of the franchise adjusted for inflation. Franchise worldwide, by the way, that's worldwide. But Paramount considered its gross disappointing compared to expectations and marketing. The motion picture's budget of $44 million, which included the cost incurred during phase 2 production, was the largest for any film made within the United States up to that time. David Gerald estimated that at the release, the film would have had to gross 2 to 3 times its budget to be profitable, which it just barely did. It made just a little over 3 times its budget. Galtro has stated that he believed Roddenberry didn't want Wise as the director, but Paramount wanted him because of his experience, and that the two powerful men's differing visions of the film kind of hurt it. The studio faulted Roddenberry's script rewrites and creative direction for the plotting pace and disappointing grosses. While the performance of the motion picture convinced the studio to back a cheaper sequel, Roddenberry was forced out of creative control. And let me go back to the beginning of this. Here we go. And one thing that strikes me when you watch, is it has such a 1970s aesthetic to it. There's a let me see. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can find this. Let me find a video right quick. Okay, so let me bring this up. This is a video. It's on YouTube. That is they kind of show like a color corrected version of the uniforms. Let's see, is that up? Okay, yeah. And this is by, I can't even pronounce this, guys. It's like a Celtic name. It's something Celtic running wolfhound. I don't know, but this is his video here.
Starfleet reports our last 6 crew members are ready to beam up, but one of them is refusing to step into the transporter.
Oh, I'll see to it that he beams up. Transporter room.
That's kind of funny to see. Although I think it's interesting because if you watch it, uh, this guy back here, the one behind Shatner, his uniform doesn't change. It still stays the same. It's just Uhura, Kirk, and Chekhov's that look different. And that's one thing about is that those uniforms are just so drab. These kind of onesies that they're wearing, not the best design in my opinion. But the film was such despite all the despite the fact that it wasn't as financially successful as the studio had wanted, I mean, it was still a big hit. And I don't think it's entirely fair that they kind of put everything on Roddenberry. And I'm perfectly willing to criticize Roddenberry, but I don't think he really bore all the brunt of this. Yes, I do think he had some responsibility, but it wasn't his fault that the studio was like, "Oh, let's do a feature film. Oh, wait, no, let's do a TV film. Oh, wait, let's do a TV film and a series. Oh, no, wait, let's do a feature film." It's not like it's his fault any more than it was Zack Snyder's fault, or not Zack Snyder, but um, what's his name, Bryan Singer's fault that there had been so many false starts in getting a Superman movie done, because with Superman Returns, it was kind of the same thing. All those productions like Superman Lives and Superman Flyby, the James Abrams version, which thank God never happened. The production costs of those were added into Superman Returns. And this is one of the shots from I think the kind of remastered. They kind of show this sort of area where the crew goes to meet V'ger kind of being constructed. And yeah, in that remastered version, the effects really still hold up well. But let's face it, the show does have a slow pace to it. Much of the movie is just the crew basically staring at a view screen when you get right down to it. But it's certainly one of the most cerebral of the Star Trek shows, maybe the most cerebral, and the one that I think kind of, like I said, kind of really does what Star Trek was sort of intended to do, which is to take a serious approach to science fiction that would also be accessible to, the average person, and try and be entertaining while also, commenting on the human condition, as I said. Okay, I guess I'm right about at an hour. So I suppose I will probably go ahead and wrap up here because I don't know, my throat's getting kind of ragged. So I think I'll stop. I will, excuse me, just a moment. Okay. I'll do another Trek Talk next week. I'm trying to remember what the episode will be. Let me take a look here. It's been so long, I've kind of lost track of where I was. I think it's Operation Annihilate, isn't it? I think that's what it is. No, no, it's Errand of Mercy, actually. Errand of Mercy will be next week. And I do plan on seeing Craven the Hunter Thursday, so I'll try and have a review for that up by the weekend, if not sooner. My expectations aren't very high. And of course, I don't know if all of you have heard, but apparently Sony has finally faced reality and decided they're not going to take this Sony Spider-Man universe, but without Spider-Man any further. My guess is that they're looking at the box office projections on Craven, which are bad, and they're deciding, you know what, this just isn't working. It's not really gonna, because you really can't have a Spider-Man cinematic universe without Spider-Man. I'm sorry, Sony, but yeah, it just doesn't work. So I'll go ahead and wrap up here. Thanks to everyone who showed up for the stream. And again, please do like the stream before you leave. And if you would, please do sub to the channel if you haven't already. And I will see you all next time, and have a good evening.